I always thought my husband Darius and I had a rock-solid relationship, the kind that could withstand the test of time and the hardships of life, where trust was as natural as breathing and respect was a given. No need for constant reassurance. We shared our daily routines, made big decisions together, and even enjoyed the comfortable silences of the weekend. There were never any jealous fits or suspicious glances. We were the couple that others envied for our apparent harmony. I believed I knew him inside and out, every gesture, every little breath he took. But stability, as I would later find out, doesn't always equal truth. That particular morning started like any other. He took an early shower, made his coffee black just the way he liked it, and gave me a quick kiss before heading out, saying he was expected at the office. He had on his favorite charcoal suit, the one he wore for important meetings, and he drove off in the company car just like he did every weekday. The final slam of the door held no hidden meaning. There was nothing unusual in his look or the way he said goodbye. For me, it was just another day in our perfectly synchronized routine. Little did I know that I was about to stumble upon a devastating truth. While tidying up the house, I went into the garage and saw our personal SUV covered in dust. The tires were flat, and the windshield was completely covered in grime, as if time had stood still inside it. I thought it would be a nice surprise to clean it up for him, a way to show him that I cared about even the little things. I gathered the cleaning supplies, carefully opened the doors, and started going through every nook and cranny, shaking out old memories that might have been stuck in the seats. I was actually looking forward to it, picturing his smile when he saw it all shiny and new again. But what I found had nothing to do with happiness. As I wiped the dashboard with a damp cloth, I absent-mindedly opened the glove compartment, just to empty it and clean it out completely. Tucked between some old registration papers and a pack of stale gum, I saw a box of condoms perfectly sealed and unopened. I recognized them instantly. It was a brand we had never used. My fingers froze as if touching that box had burned me from the inside. I gasped for air, and the world seemed to go silent around me. I stood there, motionless, holding the box, as if just touching it was a betrayal in itself. We hadn't used protection in years, ever since we decided to try for another baby, even though it never happened. It made absolutely no sense for him to have them, especially brand new ones, hidden away like some secret from another life. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and I felt something inside me break without warning. It was a quiet but heartbreaking realization. I slammed the glove compartment shut with a sudden violent movement, as if that could somehow erase what I had just seen, as if the sound of the latch clicking shut could be my denial. I backed away from the SUV, shaking uncontrollably, my legs numb, and my stomach tied in knots. My mind went completely blank. No thoughts, no questions, just a dull, constant ache in my chest. I leaned against the garage wall, unable to grasp how something so small could cause such intense pain. I couldn't even cry. It was too soon to understand what it all meant. For hours I kept telling myself that there had to be a logical, innocent, maybe even silly explanation. Maybe they were old, forgotten, bought by mistake, some absurd, unimportant act of precaution. I clung to any explanation that didn't involve cheating because the alternative was too painful to even think about. I forced myself to continue cleaning, even though my hands were shaking, and my eyes were blurry with tears I couldn't shed. It was easier to lie to myself than to face the truth. But deep down, something screamed at me that I couldn't ignore the facts any longer. That this box was a doorway to a betrayal that had been going on for quite some time. The way it was stored, how neatly it was hidden, the fact that he had said nothing. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to put together. This wasn't some leftover from the past or an innocent oversight. This was recent, planned, carefully hidden, and I couldn't pretend I didn't see it any longer. I went back inside without saying a word, like a ghost dragging her feet, my face pale and my eyes vacant. I sat down on the sofa in the same corner where we had watched countless movies, cuddled up together, and let the tears fall uncontrollably. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just cried silently, as if the pain was afraid to make any noise. Hours passed and I stayed there, still holding on to my grief with my arms crossed. No one saw me breaking apart on the inside. From that day forward, something shifted in the way I looked at him, as if his eyes weren't the same anymore, as if his smile was hiding something dark underneath. I started watching him from a distance, mentally noting every excuse, every glance at his cell phone, every gesture that I had never noticed before. He was no longer my partner but a stranger pretending to be. And I, who had always been open with him, now learned to keep quiet because something had awakened within me. I went to a local spice shop near our neighborhood and bought a packet of dried habanero chili peppers, the kind that burned just from touching them. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do, but something compelled me to act, to not just sit there and watch myself be destroyed. Back at home, I calmly crushed the chilies, feeling the burn in my eyes like a necessary punishment. I did it without crying, without trembling, like someone preparing poison with the precision of a surgeon. It was a cold decision, but it was mine. Using latex gloves I found under the bathroom sink, I opened the box of condoms with the same care one uses to defuse a bomb. One by one I filled them with that fiery powder, making sure each one was completely coated in heat. I sealed them meticulously, leaving no fingerprints, changing nothing that could arouse suspicion. It was an act of quiet, surgical revenge with no need for words or a confrontation. I didn't want justice, I wanted him to hurt. I went back to the SUV, gently opened the glove compartment, and placed the box in the exact same position I had found it, as if I had never touched it. I closed the door softly and took a deep breath, knowing there was no going back. I made sure to leave no traces, to not move anything else to avoid disrupting the scene. This wasn't a threat. It was a silent promise. If he was going to betray me, at least he wouldn't get away with it without consequences. That night, I greeted him with a calm, even loving smile, as if nothing had changed, as if I was still the woman who waited for him every day. I cooked his favorite meal, lit a few candles, and listened intently to his stories about the office, nodding silently. Inside, anger and sadness clashed like sharp knives, but I didn't let it show. I had learned to fake it better than I ever thought possible. I was an actress in my own home. Slowly, the excuses began. Last-minute meetings, urgent projects, bosses asking him to stay late. He said these things without looking me in the eye, as if the guilt was already weighing on him, though not enough to stop him. He spoke quickly, using short sentences and an urgency that hadn't been there before. Every word confirmed what I already knew, but I continued to listen with feigned understanding. He thought I didn't see anything, and that gave him comfort. The following days turned into a series of increasingly long absences, delayed text message responses, and missed calls with no explanation. He came home late, smelling of perfumes that weren't mine, and avoided physical contact as if my nearness bothered him. He started leaving his cell phone on silent, face down, with a clumsy carefulness that only confirmed his deception. I watched him from afar, mentally recording every sign. Patience had become my greatest weapon. One afternoon, armed with courage and my heart pounding in my throat, I decided to quietly follow him, keeping my car at a safe distance. It didn't take long for him to lead me to the truth. I watched him park in front of a discreet, mid-range independent hotel, the Sterling Suites, and get out with a confident stride, accompanied by a blonde woman. She was laughing, touching him as if he belonged to her, and he didn't hide it, as if this affair didn't even deserve discretion. I stayed in my car watching the scene with tears welling up in my eyes. There was no room for doubt anymore. When she turned her head, my world shattered. She wasn't a stranger. It was Tiffany Shaw, his colleague from work, the same one who had been in our home on more than one occasion. We had shared dinners, holiday parties, even personal chats about life. I felt stabbed twice. Once by him and once by her. This was no longer just cheating. It was a betrayal in the form of a cruel play. And the worst part was that they had both performed it right in front of me. They weren't just betraying me, but also her husband, Elias Hawthorne, a kind man who had always greeted me with respect whenever we crossed paths. Everything was an interwoven web of lies. A double life built on our backs without any shame. I realized they shared more than just lust. They shared secrets, plans, and hours stolen from our families. What started as suspicion now revealed itself as an unbearable certainty. The pain had names and faces. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I knew my moment hadn't arrived yet. I simply watched, recording every gesture, every knowing glance, understanding that everything would soon collapse under its own weight. The trap had already been set, and there was no way to avoid it. I became a spectator to my own revenge, letting fate take its course without interfering because sometimes silence screams louder than any words. That morning he took an extra long shower, chose a brand new shirt, and put on a cologne he had never worn with me. He looked at himself in the mirror intently, like a teenager getting ready for a date, and left the house with a smile that no longer belonged to me. I watched him from the doorway with the calm of someone who no longer expected anything. I knew exactly where he was going, with whom, and what awaited him. I said nothing, I just waited. That evening, while eating alone in the kitchen, my cell phone rang with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. On the other end, a frantic feminine voice, sobbing through words cut short by fear, asked if I was Darius's wife. My heart raced like an internal alarm, knowing that what was coming wasn't good. "Something terrible has happened," she said without needing any further explanation. The chaos had begun, and my trap had been sprung. It was her, Tiffany, the hysterical mistress, screaming that he was in the hotel bathroom, that something had caused him unbearable pain. Her voice broke as she recounted that after using one of the condoms, he started screaming, writhing, and begging for help, not understanding what was happening. She was asking me for advice as if I could somehow calm her down. I just listened, cold and without sympathy, letting her desperation give me back a little bit of my dignity. There was justice in his pain. She told me that shortly after they were intimate, he started screaming in agony, saying he felt like he was on fire, that something was burning him from the inside. They tried to rinse it off in the hotel shower, but it didn't help. The burning got worse by the minute. She didn't know what was going on, and he was blaming her, yelling like a madman while trying to get dressed. I imagined the scene with an almost cruel calmness, knowing exactly what had caused it all. It wasn't madness. It was justice in the form of searing heat. They rushed out of the hotel in the middle of the night, their clothes all messed up, covered in shame and desperation, while the front desk clerk stared at them in disbelief. They had to rush to the emergency room, where he arrived howling in pain, and she didn't know what to tell the staff. They made up a story about an allergic reaction, but no one believed it. They examined him immediately while other patients in the waiting area looked on with curiosity. The humiliation was no longer a secret. The doctors were clear. There were severe chemical burns caused by an external agent, likely in direct contact with mucous membranes. They asked if he had used any product or substance before being intimate, but he didn't know what to say. She remained silent, pale, suspecting something she didn't dare say out loud. The doctor repeated that it was an intentional reaction, not an accident. And at that moment they both understood that this was no simple mistake. In less than 48 hours, the story had spread to every corner of the office, mixed with laughter, exaggeration, and whispers in the hallways. No one knew the exact details, but everyone was talking about the incident at the hotel, the trip to the ER, the pain, and the exposed affair. Some told it with mockery, others with morbid curiosity, and still others with poorly concealed indignation. The news became unstoppable, a wildfire destroying reputations. What had been a secret was now a full-blown scandal. Colleagues barely hid their laughter when he walked down the hallways with a look of defeat, trying to act like everything was normal. Eyes met, conversation stopped when he entered a room, and Tiffany avoided showing up at the office altogether. The atmosphere became toxic with constant gossip and rumors reaching even management. What was once professional respect turned into collective ridicule. Both of them had lost more than just dignity. They had lost control of their own story. Corporate HR and management didn't waste any time getting involved. They called both of them into a private meeting, where they were informed that their behavior had damaged the company's image. There was no room for explanations or apologies, The decision had already been made. In less than a week, both of them were out with termination letters and faces sunk in shame. What had started as an adventure had become a professional disaster. No one stood up for them. From being considered an exemplary executive, a family man respected and trustworthy, he became the object of ridicule among everyone who knew him. People whispered in coffee shops, at the gym, even at the children's school, and he couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes boring into his back. His reputation was completely ruined, with no chance of public redemption. He was no longer the confident man who left every morning in an impeccable suit. He was a broken shadow of who he once was. One night, when he finally dared to look me in the eyes, he tried to deny everything, as if he still had a chance of escaping the disaster. I asked him directly if he had used one of the condoms from the SUV, and the silence that followed was the only answer I needed. I told him I knew everything, that I had seen him with her, that I had listened to the call. His face changed color, first pale, then red with anger. But he said nothing because he had no defense. After a few minutes of unbearable tension, he broke down in tears, mumbling that he had been with her for months, that he hadn't wanted to hurt me, that he had just gotten carried away. His words were hollow, cowardly, utterly lacking in dignity. He spoke of confusion, mistakes, and not knowing what he felt. But I wasn't listening anymore. I only saw a man destroyed by his own choices. His confession didn't bring me any relief. It only confirmed that there was nothing left between us. I also discovered that he had used part of our savings to buy her gifts, pay for weekend getaways, and even book spa treatments. He had invested our family's money in supporting a lie, while I was struggling to make the monthly budget work. Seeing the bank statements was like another blow to the stomach, one that no longer brought tears, only pure anger. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a deliberate, conscious betrayal, impossible to forgive. Our marriage had rotted from the inside out. I locked myself in the bathroom, my hands shaking, looking at my reflection with a mix of fury and sadness I had never felt before. I screamed silently, clenching my teeth until they hurt, because I knew I couldn't let him see how much he was destroying me. I didn't break anything. I didn't throw objects, because that rage deserved more than just noise. It deserved control. If he had played dirty, I wouldn't stoop to his level. I didn't want to save anything anymore. I only wanted to free myself. After thinking about it for several days, I looked up her husband, Elias Hawthorne, on LinkedIn, knowing that he deserved to know the truth too. I wrote him a short, direct message without any drama, offering to talk if he thought it was necessary. He replied quickly, sounding incredulous, asking for more details in a calm but broken tone. We agreed to meet on a bench in a local park, Centennial Olympic Park, where there wouldn't be any noise or witnesses. We were going to share the same pain from different sides. When I told him everything, he didn't interrupt even once. He just lowered his head and remained silent for several minutes, as if processing every word was agonizing. He thanked me for my honesty, though his voice sounded hollow, as if something had been torn out of him. He didn't cry, but in his eyes there was a defeat impossible to hide. We sat without speaking for a long time, sharing that pain without needing to explain it further. He was grateful that I hadn't stayed silent. That same night, after returning home, I quietly prepared the divorce papers, without any hesitation or doubt. I gathered all the documents I had as evidence, including photos, messages, and bank statements. There was nothing to think about because our marriage had ended long before I knew it. I left everything on the dining table in silence while he pretended to sleep on the sofa. The next day, I went to the courthouse without looking back. When he received the notification, he came running after me, crying, begging for another chance, promising to change, swearing it would never happen again. He hugged me from behind as if that could erase months of lies and humiliation. I asked him to let go without raising my voice and told him I didn't believe him anymore. There was no hatred, only an icy calm that completely unnerved him. I was no longer the broken woman. I was a survivor. Shortly after, I learned that Tiffany's husband, Elias, had also started divorce proceedings, giving her no chance to explain herself. She tried to justify everything as an emotional mistake, but he didn't want to listen anymore. She had lost not only her marriage but also the respect of her children, her friends, and her professional circle. The downfall was as quick as it was deserved. Now both of them were alone, facing the consequences of their choices. What started as a hidden affair ended in the complete destruction of two families, leaving confused children, empty schedules, and broken promises scattered on the floor. The house became a silent battlefield, full of soulless objects and memories that no longer served any purpose. The shared laughter, the family dinners. It all felt like an old movie that didn't make sense anymore. The echo of who we were still resonated in the walls, but I didn't belong to that past anymore. The divorce process moved quickly thanks to the amount of evidence I provided and his lack of resistance. He didn't contest the division of assets or the custody of the children, maybe because he knew he had no way to defend himself. He signed every paper with trembling hands, not daring to look at me. I attended every meeting with my head held high, refusing to let the pain make me give in. It was the final chapter of a story I hadn't written. The hardest part was explaining it to the children, finding the right words without destroying their image of their father, without planting hatred in their young hearts. They cried, they asked why. They tried to find someone to blame where there was no one to blame. I told them the truth without going into detail, just enough for them to understand that it wasn't their fault. Seeing their eyes full of sadness was 1,000 times worse than any betrayal. It was then that I knew I had to stay strong for them. In the neighborhood, rumors were spreading like wildfire, mixing truth with lies with that cruel tone people use when they're bored with their own lives. The curious glances at the grocery store, the conversations that stopped when I walked in. Everything spoke louder than words. I knew some people were enjoying the scandal while others pretended to be sympathetic. I kept my head high even though all I wanted to do was disappear. The shame wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs. I moved into a small apartment without any luxury or comfort, but with something I hadn't had in a long time: peace. I slept alone in a cold bed, listening to the sounds of the building, as if they were part of a new life I didn't understand yet. Sometimes the silence hurt more than the screams we never had, but at least there were no more lies. Every corner of the new home was mine, without outside shadows, without stolen perfumes. I was starting over. Even if I didn't know where to begin as the days passed, I realized that the guilt I had carried for so long wasn't mine. I hadn't destroyed anything. I was only picking up the pieces he had broken with his choices. I learned not to excuse his betrayal, not to look for answers where there were none. I began to forgive myself for having trusted, for having loved without holding back. I wasn't weak. I had just been honest in a world full of pretense. The months felt slow at first, as if each day weighed twice as much. But eventually the wounds began to heal, slowly but surely, like skin regenerating after a burn. I learned to live alone, to enjoy my own company, to not need validation from anyone else. I started reading again, cooking for myself, and breathing without anxiety. Time, that silent enemy, became my greatest ally. One afternoon I received a message from Tiffany's ex-husband, Elias, asking how I was doing. No hidden agenda, just genuine empathy. We started talking occasionally without drama, without complaining, sharing small things about our daily lives. We weren't looking for comfort, just mutual understanding. It was strange how someone who shared the same pain as me could be so easy to talk to. Sometimes you just need someone to understand, without feeling the need to explain every single detail. Our conversations grew more frequent, becoming lighter and more natural, almost as if we'd discovered a safe haven amidst a devastating shipwreck. We'd talk about our kids, the ups and downs of work, the good days and the bad, never feeling the pressure to put on a brave face. We offered each other support from a distance, no strings attached, free from expectations. We weren't exactly friends, but we weren't anything more either, just two wounded souls walking in the same general direction. And within that delicate balance, something new began to blossom. Life, as it always does, continued its relentless march forward, and each of us started to rebuild our lives in our own way. I made strides in my career, growing more confident, more decisive, and a whole lot less naive. He also reconstructed his routine, placing his focus on his children and nurturing his emotional well-being, leaving his past far behind him. For a while we stopped talking altogether. Not because of any anger or resentment, but simply because life was pulling us in different directions. But deep down, something inside me knew that this wasn't a final goodbye. We ran into each other unexpectedly at a school event. Years had passed and we found ourselves surrounded by other parents, the sounds of children playing, and the faint echoes of memories from years gone by. It began with a glance, then a shy, almost hesitant greeting, and finally a long, uninterrupted conversation on a bench in the school courtyard. Time hadn't erased the experiences we had shared, but it had definitely softened the sharpest edges, healing the most painful parts. We were no longer the same people, and that made everything much easier to navigate. There was a newfound sense of respect in his eyes, and honestly that was more than enough. At one point during our conversation, our eyes met in a way that felt different, free from any lingering expectations or sadness, replaced by a calmness that we hadn't known before. It was almost as if the past was standing behind us, observing in silence, but no longer interfering. Neither of us said anything particularly profound, but we both knew that something had fundamentally shifted between us. It wasn't about physical attraction or even nostalgia. It was something much deeper than that. It was the look shared between two people who finally truly recognized each other. We continued talking for hours, without any sense of urgency or rush. It was as if everything that had gone unsaid for so many years was finally finding its proper place. There were no accusations or uncomfortable, probing questions, just shared stories, gentle laughter, and comfortable, companionable silences. We shared the lessons we had learned, the things we had let go of, and the burdens we no longer needed to carry. He opened up about his fears, and I shared the stories behind my scars. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly deeply heard and understood. As the weeks turned into months, we started seeing each other more and more frequently. At first, it was just for a quick coffee, then for quiet, contemplative walks in the park. There were no promises made, no grand long-term plans discussed, just the effortless ease of being together without any need for masks or distrust. Trust grew organically, without us even consciously noticing it. It was nourished by mutual respect, unwavering transparency, and a silent, unspoken complicity. We didn't feel the need for labels or lengthy explanations. We simply knew with a quiet certainty that being together felt undeniably right. Without even realizing it was happening, we transitioned from casual encounters to actively seeking out excuses to see each other, as if destiny itself was gently guiding us toward a common ground. There was no dramatic romantic declaration or particularly momentous occasion, just a series of small understated gestures that subtly paved the way forward. A coffee date that unexpectedly stretched on for hours, a leisurely walk without either of us constantly checking the time, a smile that lingered just a little bit longer than normal. Everything felt simple and unforced, yet it was filled with a new budding tenderness. It was the quiet, almost imperceptible beginning of something that neither of us had anticipated. As the days went by, our conversations deepened, becoming more personal and intimate, as if each word spoken chipped away at the heavy weight of the past. We laughed without any lingering guilt, shared memories without the sting of pain, and even the silences between us became comfortable and reassuring, rather than tense and awkward. There was a sense of complicity that we hadn't been actively seeking, but which emerged on its own, feeling completely natural and effortless. I felt like I could finally be my true, authentic self without the constant fear of being betrayed or judged. And he too seemed to breathe a little easier, a little more freely whenever he was by my side. One afternoon while strolling through downtown, he stopped in front of a quaint little bookstore and took my hand without saying a word. It was such a simple, understated gesture, yet it was so incredibly full of meaning that I felt an unexpected lump form in my throat. I didn't let go of his hand for even a second, because I understood in that moment that this single action spoke volumes, conveying more honesty and sincerity than any words ever could. We didn't need to have a deep conversation about love. We were actively building it brick by brick with our actions. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't paralyzed by fear about moving forward. That night, as soon as I arrived back home, the familiar specter of fear returned, like an old unwelcome whisper, reminding me of everything I had lost in the past. I started to doubt myself, questioning whether it was truly worth risking my heart again, whether I would actually be able to withstand yet another disappointment. But something deep within me, something far stronger than any lingering wound, told me with unwavering certainty that this time was different. Not because he was perfect or without flaws, but because I was no longer the same vulnerable, naive person I had been before. And I made the conscious decision to trust my gut instinct. We embarked on a relationship without rigid labels or unrealistic, long-term plans, only with the quiet certainty that we both deserved something healthy, something genuine, something real. We didn't try to hide from the shadows of the past, but we also refused to allow it to dictate or define our present. Every encounter, no matter how small, felt like a mini celebration of everything we had survived, of what we were now building together, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't about trying to replace what had been lost. It was about making a fresh start, armed with newfound awareness and wisdom. It was a mature, adult love, free from empty promises and unrealistic expectations. Over time, we learned to live comfortably with our scars, and we even learned to laugh at the things that had once caused us so much pain. Our love wasn't perfect, but it was strong, patient, and overflowing with honesty. There were no manipulative games, no hidden secrets, and no fear of asking the questions that we had previously kept bottled up inside. We both knew all too well what it meant to lose everything. And so we consciously valued every gesture, every small detail, every moment we shared. We had found something truly special, something we weren't even actively looking for. A love that healed instead of broke, a love that nurtured instead of destroyed. One day, without any prior planning or discussion, we both made the mutual decision to never speak about the people who had betrayed us again. Not out of cowardice or a desire to avoid uncomfortable conversations, but simply because they no longer held any power or influence over our lives. The pain had gradually transformed into valuable learning experiences, and the names of those from the past were now just insignificant details in a much larger story. We chose to focus our energy on the good, on the lessons we had learned, on the challenges we had overcome, and on the new beginnings that had emerged. The resentment slowly faded away, and with it, the immense weight that we had both been carrying for so long. I never actively sought revenge, but life, in its own mysterious way, took care of dealing it out in its own perfect timing. They were ultimately left alone, stripped of their credibility, without a stable home, trapped in a prison of their own lies. And we, without ever having planned it, ended up together, completely rebuilt, stronger than ever, and filled with a quiet sense of dignity. What had initially begun as a devastating betrayal ultimately ended up uniting two lives that likely would have never crossed paths otherwise. It was almost as if the universe, after breaking us down completely, decided to reward us, not for what we had lost, but for our unwavering resilience and our ability to persevere. Today, I know with absolute certainty that the pain wasn't the end of my story, but rather the beginning of a much stronger, more resilient version of myself. I learned that even from the depths of the most devastating betrayal, a true, authentic love can be born. One that doesn't ask for permission or demand anything in return, but rather gives everything freely and with complete sincerity. I don't regret a single thing, because every tear I shed ultimately led me to where I am today. And if I had to go through it all again to arrive at this exact moment, I would do it without hesitation, because in the end I not only survived but I also loved again. We started making simple plans together, without any underlying fear, as if we were rediscovering the world together from a small but radiant corner. A spontaneous weekend getaway, an impromptu dinner date, a peaceful walk with the children at sunset. Every moment felt clean and unburdened, free from the heavy weight of unspoken words or hidden resentments. We didn't need grand gestures or elaborate displays of affection, just simple, unwavering truth. Happiness, I realized, often resembles tranquility more than it does exhilarating excitement. I caught myself smiling naturally, without any lingering guilt from the past or any crippling anxiety about the future. I was no longer waiting for someone to come along and save me or fill the empty voids within myself. I had finally learned to be complete and whole on my own, and that made all the difference in the world. Love, when it arrives after a period of intense pain and heartbreak, has a completely different flavor. Less naive, more steadfast, and far more conscious. I didn't idealize what we had, but I consciously valued it as if it were the most precious treasure. The children, too, slowly began to heal. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but time, a stable routine, and consistent, unwavering love gradually worked their magic. They saw a strong, resilient mother in me, and little by little, they stopped asking the painful, probing questions. Elias also gave them the space they needed, without being intrusive, but always being present and supportive. And although the past didn't simply disappear, it was no longer an open, festering wound. It was just another page in our shared story. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, I caught a glimpse of him playing with his daughter in the living room, laughing together as if nothing else in the world mattered. It was then that I knew with unwavering certainty that I had made the right choice. Not because of what he offered me materially, but because of what he awakened within me. Calm, trust, truth. I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable with him, to show him my true, authentic self. And that, for someone who had experienced the profound pain of betrayal, was the greatest victory of all. Months passed, and everything flowed with a natural ease that was, at times, almost startling. Sometimes, the quietness of health and well-being can feel stranger than the chaos of dysfunction, but I gradually grew accustomed to not constantly expecting disappointment, to not always preparing excuses, to simply living in the present moment. I didn't crave perfection. I just wanted presence. And finally I had it without having to ask for it or beg for it. One night, in the midst of a mundane conversation, he told me that he admired me for having survived everything without becoming bitter or jaded. I was silent for a few seconds, taken aback, because I had never really thought of it that way before. But perhaps he was right. I hadn't allowed the pain to define me or dictate my future. I had consciously chosen not to harbor hatred, not to drag around the broken pieces of the past, and not to seek vengeance beyond what was truly fair. I had chosen to love again despite everything. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't make promises of eternity or write our futures in stone. We only know that today we are here whole with scars that no longer ache, and that, in this moment, is enough. Sometimes, life doesn't grant you second chances, but it does offer you unexpected beginnings. And this one right here, right now, is the most unexpected of all. So yes, I survived. They broke me. I lied to myself. I stood up with unwavering rage. And I rebuilt myself with tenderness and compassion. And in the end, without actively seeking it, without meticulously planning it, I loved again. But this time it was from a place of truth, of calm, and above all, from a place of deep self-love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.